Hi there, and welcome to this edition of the NGINX Community Chats. Today, we're going to be coffee clatching on open source. And let me point out that from the German, Coffee Klatch means coffee and gossip. And so while I don't have my coffee with me, I'm drinking tea this morning. We want to point out that this is an informal chat. During this, you're going to hear a chance to hear about some things open sourcey, meet some of the people behind open source, both inside and outside of F5 and NGINX, maybe even learn something new. I'm Dave McAllister. I'm the open source technologist here at NGINX, part of F5. And with me today is Trishan de Lanerolle. Thanks for coming on, Trishan, and joining us on the NGINX community chats.
Thanks for having me. And I'll add, I think I'll join you in the tea-toting club because tea is my preference too.
Sounds great. So what do you do here at F5, Trishan?
So I'm a part of the infrastructure and networking group under the Security Distributed Cloud, sort of leading some of the strategic initiatives within our org, as well as acting as a sort of open source SME within Security Distributed Cloud.
Okay, so you just use the magic words, open source. So
Yep.
And occasionally we run into these challenges, but open source has had some interesting times here. What is your view of how open source is working at F5?
I think open source is an enabler right across F5 within the org, and then you also have seen F5 putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak, with the supporting NGINX as one of the major projects there. And then just behind the scenes with the applications, we have a lot of open source that's being used and contributed back to.
Yeah, we've had some interesting things, So for instance, the Arrow OpenTelemetry Arrow work that came out of the F5 side. I'm an OpenTelemetry guy, and observability is my middle name.
Mm-hmm.
So it's great to see that F5 is also contributing, and not just from acquiring NGINX, but F5 itself is also involved. We're also seeing that in the standards side, because their standards are driven that way as well. But your title down here says it, and you're involved in the distributed cloud. And we're going to throw the wild card. A couple of years back, there was this belief, came out in blogs and was all over the place, that the cloud was killing open source. You're in the cloud. What do you think? Is the distributed cloud killing open source?
I think the demise of open source to cloud is an exaggeration and not true. It's false news. If you just scratch the surface of cloud or any of the cloud providers themselves, like AWS, GCP, etc., under the hood, what do they run? It's mostly open source, right?
Yes.
It's the key platform that enables some of those technologies that you see. And I think the world we live in today is a hybrid. It's in a combination of cloud and on-prem, and all bridged together with different open source technologies.
Yeah, and that actually makes a lot of sense, because I'm in the same camp you are. And when I saw this coming out, I wrote a blog that basically pointed out that this was like one of the strangest ideas I'd ever considered, because I'm sorry, the cloud is 90% Linux. The cloud is driven by all these wonderful, cool platforms, and the cloud providers, yes, they are using services that are being provided, but they are also mostly actively giving back to the community as well. So it's actually kind of cool model of doing that.
Yeah, and I think if you want to see it in action, for example, just go step in a Kubernetes, like a CNCF or a KubeCon conference, the conference floor, and you'll see the community at work. And you just look at the name boards, right, in the different communities. It's a combination of the big name cloud providers, alongside all the different startups actively working in that space.
Yeah. So you actually talk about this, because you just brought up the other near and dear topic on my part, and I know you have some background in this, and that's around how we communicate. So I've seen some of your talks around organizing for an open source property, but I think recently you just did one on communicating. Communications in open source projects is really kind of challenging, and I'd love to get your take on how we should be communicating with the community and the users.
So you could take it at multiple levels. There's the personal, as an individual, how do you engage in an open source project and contribute there? And then as an organizational structure to start a project and build a community from the ground up. But generally, I think one key skill that goes across those is the soft skills that you need. And then people don't kind of think about it that way. Say, for example, you want to start a project. You have a open source idea, or you have a project that you want to now bring into the open, introduce a new open source project. It's not enough to just say, okay, I'm going to start a GitLab instance and stick my code up there, and here's my README and license file. That's part of it. But then attached to that, you want to try to build the community and get them excited about the project. So you want to identify what is your kind of guiding principles or your North Star for your project. Where do you see it going? And then you establish a kind of a project charter, as it were. And then you align your community along that path. And that way you guide your decisions along the North Star. So if you're building a project and you're saying, we want to build a key enabler, it's a hypothetical, but say I'm building a key plugin to enable Kubernetes to do X. And where do you see that? And that's sort of will guide your principles as to, okay, we're going to do these feature sets. Maybe that will move us closer to meeting that goal. So that's sort of one area that I would think you'd want to be aligned on, is identifying a good North Star for your project, and then developing a charter that then your community can rally around.
Yeah, well, yeah, you mentioned charters and mission statements and so forth. And every time I've ever talked about that to an open source project, they do look like I've suddenly grown a second head, because it's not what they want to do. But that also brings up the categorization. You've done sort of an organization and a futures approach. But how about where should we talk to people so that they find us? There's lots of places. Where do we go?
You got to meet where the people are, the communities, where they're out there. So one, I mentioned like KubeCon. There are big conference venues that you can present. So you take your topic there and put it in. There are CFPs. I think the Linux Foundation, for example, has several different projects around key technical verticals that you can submit an RFP and have a talk track. Then more locally, look for meetup groups that maybe tie to that interest area. If you're in a embedded sort of space, look for IoT meetup groups, for example, and then introduce your software if that's your area that you're interested in. As well as there might be, or you can even organize a one-day little mini conference for your around your project and talk track, and get others who have similar interests to submit and talk about it as well. So you kind of be a catalyst for that for your own project and build momentum around it.
Yeah, we did a one-day webinar at a former company on WebKit. I can't remember all the things I said, but I still have my coffee mug.
Yeah, and if you have budget, it's for smaller projects. It's always nice to have a little giveaway.
Yeah, it's the status, access, power stuff. Everybody kind of likes stuff to a point. Also, just adding a sort of question into this a little bit. One of the things that you've just talked about is sort of broadcasting, getting our message out there. How would you suggest we approach them talking to us?
I think that's the communication channels that you need to open up as a project. So see where the general community is. Like if it's a mailing list, then have a mailing list set up so that people can contribute to that, or a Discord forum as folks use. And these days it's Slack, right? Everyone kind of uses Slack and sets up Slack instances. One thing I would say is when you're doing something around the communication, also going back to those soft skills, you want to be mindful of the communication styles that people have.
Right.
And it's a global community. So if it's in English, sometimes you'll have folks that English is not their first language. So you'll have opportunities for them to contribute. So that would be more text-based communication, maybe, where you give an opportunity to think through your answer and type it out, versus having live Zoom meetings for folks to join. And then even if you have Zoom sessions that introduce your topic, where you have your technical community meetups that way, record them, have a transcript for folks, and so that folks can listen to the recordings at their time zones as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Back in the day, everything was done on IRC, Internet Relay Chat, and some of the coolest bots in the world. If you were moderator, you could just type AI after somebody's comments and it became an action item. You could
Mhm.
assign it to things. And because it was global in nature and low bandwidth, everybody could be involved. And you got all the concepts coming in from all these people from around the world. Something that quite often is forgotten, particularly in corporations, is open source is international from day one.
Yeah. And I would say also something that people neglect or give lip service to is documentation, because that can make or break your project too. If you want to introduce it to new folks, have an easy entry point that says, this is how you get started with the code, how you can download it and bring it up on your system. And then have the documentation in an easy doc. So it could be as simple as markdown files in your GitLab repo, or if you want to get a little fancy, have a full Confluence wiki set up that people can collaborate on.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually mentioned documentation, because that along with user interfaces has always been one of the biggest blockers to open source adoption. And the NGINX side, we do a lot of documentation work specific for our open source projects, so they can get involved in there as well. Okay, switching gears on you, just because we like to ask every one of our guests this question, no matter what. What's your favorite non-NGINX or F5 open source project?
Projects that I'm maybe a little bit involved in, I would say one that is the To-Do group. It's a OSPO-focused group that's looking at best practices across OSPO organizations across the different organizations. So I'm a fly on the wall in the To-Do group these days. And then another project that I kind of, the moment, keeping an eye on, which I was involved in my previous role and roles that I was in, is probably the Linux Foundation networking, and looking at some of their networking efforts there.
Yes, I'm also one of those people that creep around and hover on To-Do as well, and track it, but not necessarily actually involved. I'm a great lurker
Yeah,
for the To-Do group.
there is some good, interesting and good insights that you can learn when you're on there.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with all of them, and I've known most of them for many, many years, but nonetheless, the fact that we're talking about it is actually really important.
Yep.
So, any last advice you'd give for somebody who wanted to get started with an open source project?
I'd say don't be afraid. Jump in. Most communities are very friendly, and they, I'd say if you find a community that isn't welcoming, then drop it. You shouldn't be participating in it. but go in head first. I'd say take that step. Take a look at their website. Go through their bug list, for example. See if that's something that you want to tackle, or even just helping with documentation. That's an area that projects are looking for. So reach out to a project if there's a mailing list, join in and say, hey, I'm new. What's something I can help with? I have interest in XYZ, be it documentation, bug fixing, or C coding if you want. And you're more likely to find a contributor or a maintainer reach out back to you and tell you, this is something that you could work on. And I think they're excited to always have new folks join projects. It's a sign of a healthy project when they respond.
That's actually a fair comment as well, because quite often people don't respond, and you always worry about projects where even if they still seem to be delivering new features, no one is willing to talk to the outside world. It's always a little scary.
Yeah.
With that, Trishan, thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of this insights with us today. And thank you for joining us today at the NGINX Community Chats to get some of the faces behind open source here within NGINX and F5. If you've got your own thoughts and ideas, you want us to talk about something, feel free to leave us the information in the comments below. And with that, may the open source be with you.
Thanks.